Welcome to today's webinar, Relearning the FMEA AIAG VDA FMEA, sponsored by Omnex. I'm Dirk Ducharme, Editor-in-Chief for Quality Digest, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. Well, as Chad is going to tell you here in just a little bit, the AIAG VDA FMEA has updated the AIAG FMEA document that most of you have probably been using since the 60s. There are two popular formats, the one used by the AIAG, and in Germany, the one used by the VDA. And the new handbook is an attempt to harmonize both those methods. So in today's webinar, Chad is going to take a look at the new manual and some of the differences you need to be aware of if you've been using the old AIAG FMEA document. Today's presenter is Chad Keimel, CTO and founder of Omnex Incorporated. Over the course of his career, Chad has served on the Malcolm Baldrige Board of Examiners and has received numerous quality achievement awards, including the Quality Professional of the Year Award by the ASQ Automotive Division in 2005. Chad both developed and teaches auditor training for ISO 9001, IATF 16949, ISO 14001, OSAS 18001, ISO 45001, as well as an Integrated Management Systems Lead Auditor training course. And okay, Chad, it's all yours.
Dirk, thank you very much. Welcome again, folks, to the webinar, Relearning the FMEA. And of course, we're talking about the AIAG VDA FMEA. Let's go to the agenda here. So this is what I'm going to be talking to you about, and this is what we mentioned to you that we will cover today, the new AIAG VDA FMEA that really just came out a couple of weeks ago, and which has a 7-step process for both the DFMEA and the PFMEA. All right. Here's the agenda for this next hour. I'll give you a little bit on the background to the AIAG VDA FMEA. Then what we'll do is we'll compare the two different revisions of FMEA that we're used to, which is the, if you didn't know, most of us use what is called the Blue Book, which is the AIAG FMEA 4th edition. And the changes from it, its implications, and the benefits and return on investment with the AIAG VDA FMEA. Why should we care? And, using this, what benefits do we get from this? And as time allows, we'll do a couple of questions today, Q&A. All right, let's go right to the background here. The reason AIAG VDA FMEA came into being is that there were two competing standards in the world. Really, the American standard, the AIAG 4th edition, and the VDA FMEA from the Germans. So especially if you're in the automotive industry, you had two competing FMEA formats for the same products. And the risk was rated different, recommended actions were different, and really you couldn't share FMEAs from one part of the world to the other. And as all of you know, the German OEMs are very strong in Mexico, very strong in China, and other parts of the world, and also the USA. So to avoid this issue, both these groups, the AIAG and VDA, started working together. I believe it was 2016. 2016, and now 3 years later, in June of this year, we have finally got the AIAG VDA FMEA. I'm not going to tell you all the trials and tribulations, but you can just imagine that indeed to get all the different OEMs and all the key suppliers in the world to agree took quite a big, it was quite a big task here. All right, here it is. Just a continuation in terms of the background. The VDA Handbook is actually a joint publication of VDA and AIAG. And for some of you who always wondered what is VDA, now you know why we don't try to say the name. but there it is, Verband der Automobile Industry. All right. Anyhow, all the main German OEMs belong to that group along with a German supply base. All right. And though this was developed for the automotive industry, I know in today's audience, we have people from the medical device, aerospace, who are also interested in learning, and I'm sure this intrigued you. What does this relearning of the FMEA mean? And we'll share with you why this might be of interest to you. So one more thing, as you know, in our world today, it's what we call disruptive technologies. There's more and more electronics and, Internet of Things, IoT, and software coming into our products. This gives rise to, of course, lots of safety issues, not just in automotive, but also in medical devices and in aerospace and other industries. So the automotive industry is using a format of the FMEA called a FMEA MSR, which stands for Monitoring and System Response, which is one of the three methods. So we have DFMEA, PFMEA, and MSR in this current new handbook. All right, so here we are. You can see the picture of the VDA book, the old blue book. By the way, the blue book will still survive. There, and then we have the AIAG VDA. And we'll talk to you a little bit about, who would benefit the most as we go through and into the next section when we talk about the 7 steps. Just a reminder, AIAG is a nonprofit association that includes all the OEMs of the world, and the German OEMs also joined the AIAG because, well, VDA is a part of the IAOB when we write the IATF standard, all right? So there's a collaboration within the industry for coming up with all these different standards and how the OEMs can work together in a place and a setting to help themselves and their supply bases. All right, let's get right down to it. Let's compare the AIAG VDA FMEA and the AIAG FMEA 4th edition. So we'll start at the very, very basics here. What are we talking about? At the end of the day, we're talking about this relationship between a failure mode, its cause, and its effect, okay? So both the 4th edition and the AIAG VDA both are looking at the same and with some differences. So at the end of the day, what are we trying to do? We're trying to understand the risk involved in this linkages between the failure mode, its cause, and its effect. Some people sometimes get a little confused that the effect is because of the cause. Is really the effect is a result of failure mode. All right, if you look, the FMEA 4th edition, folks, never really had a set way that we did it. All of us did it in many different ways, really. So when we write this down, as you know, in Omnex, we have 2 of the writers of the FMEA 4th edition and also one of the writers of the AIAG VDA. And we actually did a webinar with all the 3 writers a couple of weeks ago. Contact Omnex if you want to hear that webinar. So our authors, or the writers of the FMEA 4th edition, generally said, here are the 4 steps people need to follow. Complete necessary prerequisites, and for each requirement, identify failure modes. Of course, there are functions and requirements. And then for each failure mode, really, the Omnex process, we always went to the cause first, and in the very end, we identified the effect. with the idea that we know a lot more about the failure mode, and then we come back and look at the effect, and then we look at the severity. All right. And then what do? For each cause, you look at the preventive and detective causes and identify and implement continual improvement. So in fact, the effect of the failure we actually do after we do step 4. Of course, you can do it any place you want to, but that's typically what the Omnex facilitators did. This, folks, is a 7-step process that came from the VDA 5-step process. So you can just imagine that our European friends are very systematic, and they want to follow quite a set pattern. And these are the 7 steps they came up with. And if you look at the very top there, you can divide it, into system analysis, failure analysis, and risk mitigation. This sheet really doesn't explain the relearning part about the FMEA, and we'll get to that in a second. But maybe what we're saying here is this is a nice summary sheet from the handbook that shows the 7 steps, and it includes both the Process FMEA and the DFMEA. All right, let's continue. So there it is. This is a 7-step process. And of course, what you see in here is a little bit of Omnex in here in terms of how Omnex thinks it is the right way to do. In fact, I took those steps out. This is pure 7 steps from AIAG VDA. Folks, in fact, this week, Thursday, I'm going to be doing one more webinar with Mr. Greg Gruska, where we talk about the problems that we see with the 7-step process and solutions. All right. So not only do you have a webinar that we've already finished with the writers, 3 of the writers of the FMEA standards, you can also get a critique and a solution from Omnex in this Thursday. Move on here. All right. So here it is. The first step is planning and preparation. And they're actually, typically, there's something called 5 T's that are done here. Omnex sometimes puts the 5 T's right into the header. Next, you have what is called structure analysis. Now, you might start seeing 3s here. Do you see 3s in the structure analysis and 3 columns in the function analysis? That's because that's the big difference and change between the AIAG VDA DFMEA and the DFMEA 4th edition. So the difference starts right here in the structure analysis. There's something called, and I'm going to be talking about this again and again, so we might as well get the lingo right. We're going to be talking about a focus level. The focus level is the system, subsystem, or component we're focused on improving. To the left-hand side is called the higher level, and the right-hand side is the lower level. In this example, and this is a little bit how the VDA folks think, they put the system element here, and they put the higher system on the left-hand side, and they look at components on the 3rd level. But folks, that's really not how the real life works, because sometimes your system has a subsystem and another subsystem before you get to the components. All right, and then you actually have hardware and software. So really, we need to think a little differently about structure analysis, but let me not get carried away. I want to be at the basic level here and say you have structure analysis of the focus level, higher level, and lower level. And then you do function analysis. You identify the functions and requirements of the focus level, the higher level, and the lower level. Next, so at this point, the 3 different levels go away when you get to the fourth step, and you're looking at the failure mode, and you're looking at the 3 levels do continue into the 4th step, and it's a very key step, folks. Once you have the functions and requirements, so typically Germans stop at the function level. If you look at the VDA FMEA, they stop at functions. Really, of course, the fourth edition always looked at functions and requirements, and that's what we would recommend. Look at functions and requirements, and look at the failure mode. Can start maybe at the focus level. That's what's numbered here as 2. Do you see that? All right. And then to the left-hand side of it is the effect of that failure. And now, because you have come up with function analysis and you have functions and requirements, this failure of this requirement causes this failure in this higher level requirement and is caused by this lower level requirement. So that's the fundamental way the AIAG VDA FMEA works. And then you have the 5th step where you still look at severity, occurrence, and detection. All right, that hasn't changed. But the action priority, we don't look at RPN anymore. There are tables called action priority with the high, medium, and low, which then sort of rules the roost, and you have to use that to decide for your next step called optimization. And there's a lot more I'm going to talk to you about optimization. And but one thing right away you can look at here is that, well, I'll make that point maybe on the next slide. So we have the 7th step then, where you have to communicate the results of the FMEA that we did. So here is a 7-step process, and teams can step through step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, step 6, step 7. Do I like it? I actually do. Why? This is the success of the 8D. If you all know what is the 8-discipline problem-solving process, the idea was to step through a discipline one by one to get best results. And I think a lot of people need that kind of guidance and coaching to really reach the last part, and I think it's been well thought out. All right, let's do a little comparison in between the form. So here you see there was only one. We had the focus level called the item in the 4th edition. That item has become 3 different levels: focus level, higher level, and lower level. So one column has become 3 different columns. All right, what's next? Well, function and requirements was only for the focus level. In the AIAG VDA, you have functions and requirements for the focus level, higher level, and lower level. Next, we have the failure effects, failure modes. This, folks, have not changed a whole lot. Okay, you still need to do the effect of the failure, the failure mode, and the failure cause. What has really changed, though, is there's a cause and effect relationship between in the BOM. If you want to think of it that way, that's exactly what it is. The higher level, the focus level, and the lower level is part of the bill of materials, and you have a relationship that you didn't have in the AIAG 4th edition. All right, what's next? Next, what we have is the risk analysis. And again, the risk analysis is very much the same, except you see AP instead of the RPN. And you also have a code you could add on in terms of filtering the highs versus the medium versus the low. All right, and a color code if you'd like. And then we have the optimization step, and you see a lot more detail here, which I'll be talking to you about, including, you can see here, actions taken with a pointer to the evidence. The forcing the team to commit to why did you revise the occurrence or detection numbers? What did you work on, prevention or detection, that you change the occurrence or change the detection? And then, of course, doing another severity occurrence and detection rating, and redoing the AP. All right, not altogether too bad. So let's look at the FMEA analytical sequence. So you start with the functions and requirements of the focus level in the FMEA, and then you identify what can go wrong, what are the causes, I'll tell you one big difference we're going to talk about in the problems and issues. And this is a key problem for Omnex. In the 4th edition, the what can go wrong, of course, was at the focus level. We focused on the causes of the current design. That's what the 4th edition did. We didn't immediately go to the lower level and say, yep, all of this is your failure, supplier, or inside the company supplier. We said, what can go wrong in the current design? And I also say this, we have written a couple of papers on this. When we surveyed the FEMA 4th edition FEMAs we had done, we did find we had causes at the focus level and we had causes at the lower level. There's much more I need to say. So I did write an article for the Quality Digest where I do talk about this. So go ahead and find it and read that. All right. Once you came up with the causes, you said, how can this be prevented? And then you came up with the occurrence number, because occurrence is tied to prevention. And then how can this be detected? And we came up with the detection number. And then we went back, if you want to, you could do it right up front. How does this impact the customer? And you came up with the severity. And based on that, then, you came up with the risk or the RPN. Of course, folks, nobody just went by RPN. All our sophisticated, customers did SOD. They looked at various, and we were very much, we showed people how the SOD, how you could make funny decisions if you just went by one way of looking at things. All right, and then based on the risk, what did you do? Recommended actions. How can this be improved? Okay, all right. So that is the analytical sequence of the FMEA 4th edition. How about the AIAG 1st edition? All right. So you first look at the BOM, you lay out the structure. I'll show you an example shortly. And look at the functions and requirements of each of the 3 levels. Well, you could say that's a lot of work, but that needs to be done. And then you look at the relationship between the failure mode, the failure cause, and the failure effect. It's sometimes called the failure net. Okay? So what can go wrong? What are the causes? And how does it impact the customer? And based on that, you came up with prevention and detection, and then identified the action priority from the action priority tables, and then came up with the severity, and then how can this be improved? Okay, the optimization step. So this is then the sequence. You might just say generally the same sequence, but of course, the complexity here is the 3 levels. And you can ask all these different questions, which I'll ask shortly. That is, can the team at the focus level, how much do they know about the customer's product to identify the functions and requirements, and how much do they know about the supplier's product to identify the functions and requirements at the lower level? And just keep in mind, if it's your own product, this is a good way to decompose from the system to a subsystem, and a subsystem to components or into hardware and software. I hope you all understand when I say decomposition of the functions and requirements at the topmost level can get decomposed using the AIAG VDA further down. And folks, I'll share this with you later, that this whole idea of identifying the top level system requirements and decomposing it is a very important thought, not just for the AIAG VDA FMEA and its improvements, but for other parts of the company in something we'll call the V, a little bit the engineering V, which is the system, the requirements at different levels of a product and the accompanied testing for it. All right, so here it is. Just to remind you, right up to the failure analysis, we have the focus level in 3 different columns. We have the higher level shown in blue, and then we have the lower level in blue. Folks, this is the key understanding to relearn the FMEA using the AIAG VDA format. And it's not just for the DFMEA. We use the same 7-step process also for the PFMEA and the similar thought process. All right. So let's move to the next section then, talking about the changes from the FMEA 4th edition and the implications of it. So folks, some important things here, and I'll start going deeper into the AIAG VDA handbook as we go through the 7 steps. So here you see in step 1, the project planning, the 5 T's, and then the very important thought of something called a baseline FMEA. The Americans called it a family FMEAs, and really happy that the AIAG VDA handbook really pushes this whole idea of baselines and design reuse coming out of it. Okay, so they have this thought that the baselines have been created. Of course, if you haven't, you'll have to create it from scratch the very first time. Okay. Next, what do you have? You have the structure analysis that shows the BOM visually, and it's called the structure analysis. So this is also where you can do a boundary diagram. Omnex would say you got to do a boundary diagram. If you don't do the boundary diagram, you really can't do a good job. In the next step of function analysis, we also very much today, we're getting better and better, in terms of doing FMEAs. You really should also do an interface matrix. Both of these tools are there in the AIAG VDA handbook as optional tools to use. Then in step 3, you look at the functions and requirements at the focus level, higher level, and lower level. Now, I've said this so many times, okay? And in the process FMEA, you really are looking at characteristics at the focus level. Let me just go back here. I've been talking about design FMEA, the structure analysis of the process FMEA. You have the line on the left-hand side as a higher level, the machine as a focus level, and on the right-hand side, they do sort of cause and effect. Remember the 5M, 1E, man, methods, material, as a cause for the failure modes, and they identified that in the structure analysis. In the function analysis, folks, for the process FMEA, its characteristics at the focus levels, and the causes then are in terms of work standards, the 4M, man, material, and so on. All right, and the failure analysis is where the linkage between the failure mode at the focus level with the effect on the higher level and the cause at the lower level. And then, of course, you do risk analysis, the SOD, and the action prioritization, and then optimization in step 6 with the risk mitigation activities, and then, publishing a management summary and not just results documentation, but it's communication of the results. So this is a 7-step process. And of course, you could say this is one of the big changes between the 4th edition and the AIAG 4th edition and the AIAG VDA FMEA is this idea of the 7 steps. Let's go a little bit more. The form is more prescriptive, a significant number of additional columns to fill out, especially when you get to the recommended actions or the optimization steps. It becomes very, very, they want you to fill out a number of things to make sure you don't miss something. And what else? The severity, occurrence, and detection indices for both the design and the process have changed. And of course, this action priority composite index is different from the RPN, and the introduction of this MSR for mechatronic systems, especially if you're interested in safety. All right, I feel like I'm being a little repetitive here. There's a formalized 7-step process. Let's go on. All right, step 1, there's the addition of the 5 T's. So you can see here, team, timing, intent, tool, task. Typically in the AIAG VDA, the tool is really the software tool that you're going to be using. Folks, let me just say this. With the complexity of the new form, Excel doesn't quite work because the relationship is 3-dimensional in this new AIAG VDA FMEA. All right? So what else is new? The selection and scoping of what you're going to be working on, and acquisition of significant data. You know, folks, to do the AIAG 4th edition right, also you should have done all these things. But maybe what you can say the difference is that the AIAG VDA FMEA makes it a part of the process, okay? And it makes it part of the handbook rigor and makes it part of the steps. All right, so a very important step, step 1. In step 2, this structure analysis, do you see the structure tree here? This is new. So we had the boundary diagram, a block diagram in the 4th edition. The structural analysis of AIAG VDA is new. Now the handbook says, or between the two, really, you cannot do a boundary diagram and not do a structure tree, because as you all know, the relationship of the focus level, higher level, lower level hinges on the structure tree, so you need to end up having to do both, all right? So that's the difference in the AIAG VDA and the Design FMEA. And in the Process FMEA, I know you can't see it, but we'll just tell you this, that there's a structure analysis tree, which is the flow chart. Process flow is actually right here, versus, and this is the example of a process flow they did, really for Omnex, who has worked with this for a long time, and I don't know if you all know all our histories in terms of having helped invent the FMEA, the linkages between the process flow, control flow, and FMEA. Yours truly, by the way, did that in the 1980s. And, you know, we're dismayed by the poor process flow that showed. And again, it shows this process, they say process flow or the structure tree in the Process FMEA. All right, so we're talking about step 2, and really we're talking about differences. And I was telling you as a summary here that the 4th edition had the block diagram for the DFMEA and had the process flow diagram for the PFMEA. And in both places now, we have given an OR, and you can do a structure analysis. The step itself is called a structure analysis, and they're giving you an option. And I just wanted to mention to you, you really don't have an option in the DFMEA. You have to do both. All right, let's go on. Next, in the step 3, what's different in step 3? Well, in the AIAG 4th edition, you just looked, we only looked at the focus level, and you came up with the functions and requirements of the focus level. What's different is there are 3 levels in the AIAG VDA, a higher level and a lower level, and you really will be coming up for the lower level with the sub-functions and sub-requirements that meet the overall top-level requirement, okay? Actually, a very important thing to do when you're doing the engineering V, which I'll talk to you about that, and maybe some of you already understand what I mean by that. And then you actually have to do the relationship of this requirements to the higher level that you're trying to meet from your customer, okay? So very nicely, the AIAG VDA does that, but of course, it makes it something very different. Both methodologies called for a P diagram optionally, and in the function analysis step, similar to each other, is in the function analysis of the focus level, always it was characteristics, okay? It's there currently also. All right, just a little bit here, which I already pointed out to you earlier, the one big difference
you have the item, which used to be the number 2 there, but now you have into 3 different columns, all right? The BOM being represented and the functions and requirements are higher and lower levels. All right? And then, of course, you have this level-to-level relationship, which is very different from the 4th edition. I know you saw it earlier, where we're presenting it here as a difference between the 2. And this level-to-level difference, meaning 3 levels of structure, 3 levels of function, 3 levels of failure, is purely an AIAG VDA way of doing things, whereas you had all 3 of these, but only at 1 level at the AIAG 4th edition. All right, what else do you have? You can see, I don't think this is a big deal, but you started with the failure mode in the 4th edition, and in the AIAG, VDA, the failure mode is in the middle at the focus level, and so there's the switching of the columns of the cause and the effect. All right, let's keep going. Then we have step 5. The step 5, what's the same? Well, you have a 10-point scale in both. In both, you have severity, occurrence, detection. Severity ratings are almost the same, but at the 9 and 10, the safety without warning, there's one difference at the very top. Other severity is very, very much the same. And the detection rating reflects the maturity and effectiveness of the detection method. What's different? The biggest difference is really in the occurrence. The 4th edition occurrence actually looked at your ppm level, and you could tie it back to the amount of numbers of occurrence. Occurrence now in the AIAG VDA is about the newness of the design. How new is the technology? And you get higher numbers from that, versus if it's reuse, you get lower numbers. A very different way of looking at things. And in detection, well, you don't see the drive towards mistake proofing that you see in the 4th edition. So one of the things you can imagine Omnex is going to do is we're going to change the detection rating to include, the mistake proofing, because that's something that really ran and helped really improve the U.S. industry. All right. In fact, maybe I said some of the things a little early in the slide. So here you see the severity ratings. Looks at 3 points of impact, which is the same as the 4th edition, the plant. So you look at severity, you look at everything downstream, all right? But I'll say this, folks, it was there before, but not really emphasized in the 4th edition. In the 4th edition, the effect of the failure in the process FMEA ties to a design FMEA. So there's a relationship between design failure and process failure in the AIAG VDA FMEAs, okay? All right. And what is difference? I already mentioned to you the occurrence ratings. The ratings of that have changed. Detection ratings also have changed, are based on more the opportunity of detection through human, machine-based, or automated inspections, okay? Values will be higher if you don't use some sort of automated inspection in the detection ratings. And I already mentioned to you, the AIAG 4th edition really focused on mistake proofing, which you don't see in the AIAG VDA FMEA. All fixable, which we'll talk about in the problems and issues sites. All right. I hope you don't mind me taking a quick clip through here. And that way, I'll get a few minutes to take Q&A. And so let's look at the action priority table. And the action priority table is driven really with the severity is the boss here that drives looking at occurrence and detection. And you actually get, you get tables with red, yellow, three different colors in terms of high risk and lower risk. And there's a combination for every different level of, the combination. You get, a AP rating, which they help you identify what's high, what's medium, what's low. Okay, so so you have the severity, occurrence, detection combination that you can look up as a team. And folks, again, the AIAG VDA Handbook will tell you to use that as a suggested method, but really study that. And with time allows, Greg and I will try to talk to you about some of the mistakes you can make by solely looking at things one way, where you could be passing on much higher risk blindly. All right, but what is the biggest point here? That you have the action priority table and the severity and occurrence and detection tables have changed, and because of that, what you work on will be different. All right then, here is the highest priority, so H. The team must identify an appropriate action to improve prevention or detection. Folks, if you improve prevention or detection controls, you change the occurrence number and you change the detection number. That's why they're looking at prevention and detection as the only actions you can take. As you all know, severity is by design. So if you don't change the design, you can't change the severity. All right. So medium, again, identify appropriate actions to improve prevention and detection controls. And the lowest priority, anyway, typically the teams don't have time to work on M's and L's. And you look at the H's, and hopefully we'll take good action and drive the high priorities into medium or lows through the optimization step. All right. So the AIAG VDA Handbook emphasizes the importance of risk reduction as by really, if you look at this optimization, you'll see the number of different columns that have been, added. So what does it do? It makes you really say, if you come up with different occurrence and detection numbers, you better have different prevention for the occurrence and a different detective actions. What else do you have? Well, responsibility and target completion dates were always there. But you do have a status here in terms of telling you what is the current status of these actions, and then you have to take the action, and of course we're all thinking of this as using software like the Omnexus Aqua Pro software in the AIAG VDA methodology, where the pointer is there, you click it, and it opens up the evidence. All right, we always had completed date times, and we had a redo of the severity, occurrence, and detection, so that hasn't changed. But what has changed is some more of the detail there. So let's move on here. The last step is communication, and I'm really happy to see this last step, become more of a discipline, that we force the team to say, hey, what were you trying to do? What did you come up with? And what are the results of the actions that you have taken, right? And that's what you see. And then the standard format that's recommended in the handbook that we can follow. All right. So the very last difference here is that the MSR is brand new. And folks, by the way, not only do we have AIAG VDA training, as you know, Omnex is a global company, and we have rolled out training, in Mexico. We have rolled out training in China. We have rolled out training in Europe and in India for the AIAG VDA FMEA. And we also have training for the MSR. Actually, Mr. Mike Down, one of the authors of the 4th edition FMEA, was currently on the SAE task force rewriting the FMEA. I know, so those of you are listening in, the aerospace industry uses the SAE standard for FMEA. It is currently being rewritten, and Mike Down is on that team. So is actually Mary Rousey, is also both the AIAG VDA author and also the SAE author. So Mike Down was our champion in rewriting this FMEA MSR, and for electronic systems which have a sensor, controller, and actuator. All right. That really covers the difference between the AIAG 4th edition and the AIAG VDA FMEA 1st edition. I hope you have some takeaways from here. So what can we say? Hey, we got 7 steps. What else can we say? It's a big form. What else could we say? Well, up to the 4th step, well, actually, it'll be starting with the 2nd step to the 4th step, you have 3 levels. And the 3 levels are linked levels of a BOM, all right? And, of course, we could tell you more, but those are the key changes I'd like to recall in this webinar. So why should we care about the AIAG VDA FMEA? So let's look at this. Well, a disciplined 7-step process. The handbook defines roles for the manager, team member, and facilitator. So Omnex really has implementer training coming in. We have facilitator training to help people who need to be facilitators, and we have implementer training with the idea that AIAG VDA needs, especially because of its collaborative aspect, needs to be thought of as part of the new product development process. And the idea of the structure tree for the flow down of functions and requirements, also the failures. In fact, once you do the FMEA in this way, not only do you fulfill the V I'm going to talk to you about, you also get a fault tree analysis, okay? And hopefully, there will be some things that change in the automotive industry where the customer and suppliers and the next levels, sub-suppliers, work closer together. All right. I'm just going to keep going here. Folks, the FMEA has driven a lot of PPM. In some industries that haven't gotten its fair share, like the aerospace industry, the 4th edition drove great benefits for all of us. And really, going to the AIAG VDA FMEA, I don't think is going to give us all that much improvement in PPM, because the PPM in the automotive industry is low. Folks, those of you from the other industries, if you want to learn, find out how the automotive industry went from 100,000 PPM down to 60 PPM, down to 30 PPM. Now, if you're 15 PPM, you stick up as a supplier. The real use is going to be in what we call design reuse. Folks, creating these documents take a long, long amount of time, and really having that in that baseline that we talked about, and then using that baseline. So a design FMEA is not a standalone. A design FMEA links to a DVPNR or a test plan. You identify special characteristics, and you have process flow PFMEA control plan. That's a lot of work that's being done. About 80% of that work goes if you do reuse, okay? So that's where the savings comes from, and that's a significant ROI that can be shown to your top management by going to the AIAG VDA FMEA. What else do we get? Well, many of the industries, folks, those of you in the aerospace industry already were in a V. You probably didn't know it. Let me just go to the V and come back here. Here's the V. Here's the V. See here the customer requirements? Our system requirements have to tie in to the higher level, which is the customer requirements, and have to be tied in to the lower level, subsystem requirements. And it works like that at each level, cascading requirements down one leg of the V, and then linked through the detective and preventive controls into the test plans And the DVPNR, folks, is got the results documented too. So if you want to get this V, really, you need to have the AIAG VDA FMEA. The fourth edition cannot do this for you. Yes, the AIAG VDA is harder to do, but this is a big benefit, and the automotive industry standards require it. So I see AIAG VDA FMEA. Of course, folks, a couple of caveats. You have to do step 2 with functions and requirements, right, if you want to get that flow down, and then you have to tie in the DVPNR to the DFMEA to get the right-hand side. So really, this here, if you can see that, which is the left-hand side and the right-hand side of the V, have to be there. And this is absolutely important if you're interested in ensuring customer requirements are satisfied. If you're really interested in safety, you are really interested in this methodology of identifying requirements and flowing down requirements. Then, of course, you have to attach the characteristics to the functions and requirements linking design to manufacturing. Either way, folks, you need to do it proactively, but either way, when the characteristics failure happen in the PFMEA, it makes a design function fail. So that linkage is there. You'll have to develop that linkage. If you don't get it proactively from design, it'll come reactively through Process FMEA. That's the way the AIAG VDA FMEA works, and a very good thing. All right, so surprisingly, Dirk will tell you, I never finish on time. But I did want to finish today, and so let me do the summary so we can take at least 1 or 2 questions, Dirk. So the AIAG VDA FMEA introduced a number of changes, and it uses the same steps between the DFM and the PFMEA. Folks, I'll also complain about it in the Thursday webinar, because I think it's a little bit contrived for the PFMEA. You know, I know the Germans want to use the same 7 steps, but it's not quite there in the PFMEA. It's a much larger sheet and a 3-dimensional relationship not easily captured in Excel. Pretty much everybody knows you're going to have to use software. All right. The failure analysis focuses on the failure cause to be at a lower level, while the 4th edition focuses on the current design. I told you that, right? That's also an issue for us, and we'll talk about that this Thursday. Then there's a choice between using process flow or structured tree in the PFMEA step 2 structure analysis. We recommend you going with the process flow diagram. It's much easier, much better, more descriptive. And then AIAG VDA encourages requirements management. Out of this, you've got to do requirements management. And if the function requirement is used in the DFMEA and linked to the DVPNR, you get your engineering V. Last point here, if you want ROI, if you want to show ROI, you know, to be able to buy the software, do all the training you need to do, it is the idea of process reuse and design reuse. Just wanted to tell you a few references. So one of the references is, of course, the rollout that we did with the writers of the AIAG VDA FMEA in 4th edition. We did that June 13th. It's available. Contact Omnex. Then, what else can I tell you? We have software for doing new product development, functional safety, and the 7-step process. What you see on the left-hand side is actually the 7 steps, everything linked, including the DVPNR, and also in the PFMEA, and the PFMEA automatically links to the Design FMEA. We had that for the 4th edition, so it wasn't so much of a stretch for Omnex because we had figured out all the links. Then, of course, very importantly for Omnex, we linked the 8D back into the FMEA so that the failures come back into the baseline FMEA so it can improve all the products, not just the one that failed. All right, so pictures of, I'm just going to that everything is linked. Right up to the work instructions, You make one change, it changes all the way to work instructions, including all the children and, from the family, parent to the child, everything is changed. Some of the linkages in our enterprise package. And upcoming webinars. So this next webinar, Problems and Solutions, contact Omnex for that, and we're going to do a couple more webinars, transitioning to the AIAG VDA FMEA. What do you need to do to transition? And then the last one is actually using software to connect the supply chain. And you can see what we're thinking of on how to do that. Also let you know, we have training. It's actually global training. We don't show you the classes running in other parts of the world. And I'll stop here, Dirk, and let's take at least 2 questions before I go
Okay,
to the
so there's
airport.
there's 2 main questions. You've already kind of touched on one. Several people, focused in on, hey, if you can't do this using Excel, what is it you're going to do? And if I'll answer this a little bit, Chad, and you can jump in, just so that people don't think you're self-serving. Everything I've heard, Quality Digest has heard, is that trying to implement this in Excel, if not impossible, is all but impossible. So you really are going to have to search out a software vendor to help you with this. Obviously, Omnex does this. Do you want to add to that, Chad?
I'll just say this. Our experts are telling us that, if you don't have very complicated parts, you can do it in Excel. But as soon as you start getting into, complicated parts, you're going to need to have software. So I agree with you, Dirk.
Okay. And the other one several people want to know is, what is the effective date for the new FMEA standard? What is the timeline to be implemented by industry?
So there's no timelines that have come. So the early adopters will be global tier 1s who have 2 different versions in their company and who are trying to standardize globally. And really, I think the pull to using the AIAG VDA FMEA is the design reuse and the V and being global. October, I knew the date, but I can't recall the exact date in October. We're expecting to see customer-specific requirements from the 3 OEMs telling us exactly what their expectations are for the AIAG VDA FMEA. So right now, the early adopters are going to adopt this because they think it's good for them. Yeah, we have an hour and a half in the next webinar we're doing. Send me these questions, and in the end of that webinar on Thursday, Greg and I will we'll go ahead and get all your questions, and we'll answer all those questions for you in the tail end of that webinar, okay? Come and join us and try to look and see from our viewpoint of somebody who's been doing FMEAs for me since about 86 or 87, starting with the requirement for Ford Motor Company in Q101. What do we think, because the AIAG VDA FMEA is a political animal because it's put together and have to be signed off, right, by many, many, many people. What do you think, what do we think, do you get the greatest benefit in terms of using the 7 steps? Now, I'll say this, Dirk, I don't want anybody to think we're not all for AIAG VDA FMEA. We are all for it. We think it's great. We think it'll benefit you a lot. We encourage it actually in the aerospace industry, for those who really have to do that V and flow downs, and for the medical industry. And for those in the, medical devices, I'm on the U.S. Task Force tag for the medical ISO 13485 and ISO 14971, which is RISC. We're already looking at taking some of these tools and building it into our training courses for those industries. So thank you again, Dirk.
Yep, and you all will be receiving an email with a link to a recording of this webinar as well as a PDF of the slides. We will also, Omnex will also make sure that they include information for the next webinar that Chad is talking about, where you can kind of continue this discussion and he will address those questions. So keep your eyes open for that email. So from all of us here at Quality Digest and Omnex, you all have a great day, and we will see you at the next webinar. So long.
Thank you, everyone.